This video is brought to you by NordVPN. For an exclusive deal, check the link in the description. It helps you, and it helps us. True crime is absolutely huge. It seems that every single day there is a new documentary on a serial killer and their twisted motives or their elusive disappearance. The general public love to learn and discuss people like John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Son of Sam, and everyone in between. Even on this channel, we've indulged in the horrific tales of Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, and the Zodiac Killer. It's a type of morbid curiosity that a lot of us share in learning about. But sometimes true crime can be absolutely unpredictable. Way back in 1916, somebody briefly became the most feared killer in America. He stalked the New Jersey area looking for prey. He went after adults and children. He showed no mercy to his victims. He left them withering in pain and missing limbs. He disappeared just as soon as he had arrived. His motivation was unclear, yet uncomplicated. He took the lives of 4 innocent individuals. In time, his actions would inspire one of the greatest slasher films of all time. He was a shark. Today, we will be discussing the tale of a seafaring creature that had a lust for blood. The great white shark that inspired Jaws. The New Jersey beast, the Matawan Maneater. Before even getting into the video itself, though, we did quickly want to discuss the elephant in the room. Like, seriously, an animal serial killer? Well, believe it or not, yes, it is quite possible. Well, the definition isn't very complex, a waiting period plus a couple of victims. It might be closer to a spree killer, but we can be a little loose with the terminology today. It's also not like animals aren't sometimes vicious and cruel. Animals have had a long history of combative behavior with humanity dating back to time immemorial. Sometimes they like to prove humans just aren't at the top of the food chain, but most of the time, these are solitary events, one-off attacks. Sharks are no different. The vast majority of attacks are mistaken identity or a human getting between a shark and its food. There, however, exist exceptions for all animal species. Some attack humans intentionally, usually due to food shortages or habitat destruction. Even rarer are the animals that intentionally go after people for seemingly unclear reasons. We typically call these animals man-eaters. There exist quite a few, some infamous in their own right, like the Champawat tiger or the leopard of Pinar. Today's subject matter might not have killed as many as those man-eaters, but it did something unique onto itself. Like the Ripper before it, and the Zodiac after it, the serial killer shark utterly destroyed everyday life in the New Jersey area. A reign of terror for a month ensued with all the madness that entitles. It's no wonder author Peter Benchley was inspired by this event when he wrote the novel Jaws. Later, of course, adapted into the legendary film, which itself references this event.
Before, the Jersey Beach, 1916, there were 5...
Technically, this is pretty much a Who-inspired episode, as the inspiration behind Jaws was one of the ones on the list. However, without further ado, let us explore the events and the legacy of the 1916 New Jersey shark attack. Prior to 1916, the scientific community's understanding of sharks was limited at best. Sharks were definitely understood to be apex predators of the ocean, but they weren't considered very threatening to humans. Reports of shark attacks before 1916 are scattered at best, usually occurring in the Pacific Islands and Australia. As far as the United States was concerned, such events never happened. Saturday, July 1st, 1916. A record-breaking summer in terms of heat on the Jersey Shore. The beaches were packed with all sorts of beachgoers, those who came to swim, sunbathe, and just enjoy the sand. Charles Epting Van Zandt was one of those people. Described as being a charming and athletic man, he was beloved by all that knew him, and was a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in arts and science. At just 23 years old, he had his whole life ahead of him. He was in town on vacation from Philadelphia. After a nice dinner at the Ingleside Hotel where he was staying, he decided to visit Beach Haven, a beach off of the southern coast of New Jersey. Van Zandt befriended a dog playing in the sand. Only a few moments after entering the calm waters, Van Zandt became hysterical. People on the beach thought he was just calling out to the dog. Once everyone realized Van Zandt was in real trouble, lifeguard Alexander Ott managed to pull Van Zandt out of the water, revealing a bloody mess of where Van Zandt's left leg was. He was brought back to the Ingleside Hotel and fatefully bled out on the manager's desk. He had lost consciousness after being pulled out of the surf and never woke up. Charles Van Zandt died at 6:45 p.m., surrounded by family and sorrowful medical staff. The first young man to unfortunately fall victim to the shark. Sheridan Taylor, a man who witnessed the entire thing, claimed he saw the shark follow Van Zandt all the way to the shore. Whether or not that's true, the pot of hysteria was being stirred. The animal that had taken his life was reported to be 9 feet long, 500 pounds, with a massive dorsal fin. This doesn't even narrow down the shark species today, let alone in 1916. No immediate action was taken, the beach remained open. The shark had probably hit and run and was already across the ocean by now. Flukes do happen, and this seemed like one of them. Charles Van Zandt was laid to rest on July 5th. Many attended, but few remembered him for long. Nowadays, the only people who visit his lonely grave are distant family. Nobody cares about the life of a once promising young man, now only known for the manner of his death, which would, really soon, be repeated. Thursday, July 6th, 1916. "45 miles north of Beach Haven, Charles Bruder, an employee for the Essex and Sussex Hotel, was swimming far off of the coast. He made it nearly 130 yards before the water turned red and screams echoed through the shore. Fortunately, 2 lifeguards, Chris Anderson and George White, were watching Bruder closely as he was far enough offshore. Anderson and White rowed a lifeboat out to Bruder. They pulled him aboard, and the sight was ghastly. He was indeed missing his 2 legs. The bones were visible. Unfortunately, Bruder didn't even make it to the shore as he bled out on the lifeboat at just 27 years old. As he was dragged on the beach, nearly 500 people saw what had happened. Later, the newspaper reported,
"Hundreds of men and women and many children were on the beach this afternoon when a swimmer, far out beyond the outer lifelines, raised a cry for help. George White and Chris Anderson, lifeguards who had been watching the swimmer closely because of his distance from shore, launched a lifeboat and started for him while the crowd on the beach watched in suspense and fear."
This wasn't an isolated incident anymore, and now the public was terrified of going in the water after watching the horror unfold in front of them. Beaches were closed, but only for a few hours. Soon they were open again, with more nets and armed people on boats ready to attack any shark. Shoreline patrols were given rifles, axes, and even harpoon guns. On July 8th, a fin was sighted near another Spring Lake beach, resulting in everyone going guns blazing after it. It might not have even been a shark, but people were on edge. At Asbury Park, a shark was repeatedly hit in the head with a boat oar until it fled. Another shark at Beach Haven was shot in the head with a .38 caliber revolver. Charles Bruder had no close family in the United States, just friends and acquaintances. But they all loved him, so they all pulled together some money for a decent funeral. He was originally intended to be sent home to Switzerland, but the chaos of the Great War prevented that. Instead, $1,000 was sent to his mother. Today, he still lies buried, far from home. A tiny little headstone with just his name and the date of his demise at the hand of a merciless sea creature. Wednesday, July 12th, 1916. In the sleepy suburbs of Matawan, far from the luxurious beaches we last discussed, something was lurking in the waters. Thomas Cottrell, a ship captain, reported seeing an 8-foot-long shark in the waters of Matawan. He was ignored. The waters in Matawan were nearly impossible for a shark to be inhabiting. Around 2 p.m., a group of boys went down to the ocean to play. One of them was 11-year-old Lester Stillwell, an apprentice who worked at a basket factory. Lester was pretty happy. His friends treated him well, if a bit different due to his occasional convulsions that would now be diagnosed as epilepsy. One friend named Rennie mentioned the previous day that something large bumped into him at the nearby Matawan Creek. Most still teased him for fearing a sea monster. While in the water, the boys spotted what was, according to them, an old black weather-beaten board or a weathered log, but continued playing. Only a few moments later, a dorsal fin cut through the water, signaling to the group that it was more than just some driftwood. The 11-year-old boy, Lester Stillwell, was caught and pulled underwater before he could swim away to safety. His friends ran to get help. They found help in Watson Stanley Fisher, a giant of a man, but friendly to anyone he met. Most of the town's citizens didn't believe their shrieks and claims of a shark in the water, but Stanley Fisher did. He could see the terror in the young children's eyes. He took off towards Matawan Creek, ready to help. He thought poor Lester had suffered one of his epileptic fits. Most of the town followed suit, curious to see what had happened. By the time they all got to the dock, there was no sign of Lester, just a pool of blood. Fisher and a few others dove into the water and began trying to find the poor kid's body. The water was dirty and murky, nobody could see anything. One by one, the rescuers gave up and climbed onto the dock. Lester was clearly dead. For all they knew, the body was in the deep end of the river. Fisher was about to give up when he looked up to see both Lester's mother and his girlfriend watching on tearfully. Fisher then decided to go look one more time. It was the right thing to do. In the darkness, he saw the child's body in what appeared to be a large log rolling around the corpse. With a firm tug, Fisher reached the surface with the deceased child in his arms. For a moment, all was quiet. Then, something loudly ran into Fisher's leg. Fisher himself was also bitten by the shark. He lost his balance and fell into the creek 2 times before the shark finally let go and fled. When he was finally pulled onto the dock, his leg was bleeding profusely. Several arteries had been cut. From the hip to the knee were bite marks and flesh hanging by a thread. A rope was tied around to slow the bleeding, but it did little. In complete shock, Fisher couldn't tell how bad the wound was. In the hospital, Fisher mentioned seeing how badly damaged Lester's body was. The shark had still been eating him when he grabbed their remains. Later that day, he passed away. The beloved Matawan tailor was gone, leaving behind a caring family, a sweetheart, and an entire town that respected him. A child and a young man had lost their lives. It remains one of the worst days in Matawan history, but it unfortunately wasn't over just yet. On the same day as the attack in Matawan, the New Jersey Maneater would strike for a 5th time. Joseph Dunn, a 14-year-old boy, was swimming in the Wyckoff dock in New York, a mere 30 minutes away from Matawan. The shark bit Dunn's left leg, and he blacked out as he began being pulled underwater, but his brother came to the rescue and had a vicious fight saving Joseph from the shark. Dunn was rushed to St. Peter's University Hospital and fully recovered from the attack, being the first victim to survive the shark's brutality and the last case of the Matawan Maneater, as the shark is now called. This string of brutal killings was only the beginning to the public of New York and New Jersey. At first, Van Zant's death was brushed off as merely nothing, while when the second attack occurred, it was being published in the paper and being talked about just about everywhere. People were shocked more about the perpetrator than the killings themselves. As we stated, in 1916 it was common knowledge that sharks were docile if not threatened. Ichthyologists all agreed sharks don't bite people. By the 3rd and 4th attack, people were starting to question what was really happening. It had come out to the public that Stillwell, the young boy, had the aforementioned history of epilepsy and drowned in the creek, denying all evidence of a shark attack. Some theories dispute any shark attacks from happening at all, which we will come back to. However, when the boy's body was finally found, it was clear what really happened. When the question about whether or not a shark was responsible for all these deaths was answered, President Woodrow Wilson was contacted. Wilson authorized the United States Coast Guard, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and even a federal agent to hunt the shark down. The House of Representatives approved $5,000 of material to help find and exterminate the shark. To Wilson and countless Americans, they were Captain Ahab, and the shark was Moby Dick. At this point in time, World War I was raging on, and only in America could the Battle of Verdun, the Battle of the Somme, and the Brusilov Offensive be considered secondary news to an uncaught shark. British Prime Minister H.H. Asquith was floored to discover that the United States had declared war on sharks, not Germany. Before aid could arrive, locals took it upon themselves to get rid of the bloodthirsty shark. Nets were everywhere. Any sign of movement was responded to with shotgun blasts and thrown dynamite. The loud explosions didn't stop until the sun rose. Nobody knew what to think. Most assumed it was the same shark, as shark attacks were beyond rare and thought to be pretty much impossible. More sharks started to flock to the mid-Atlantic coast as they often do during that time of the year. But this was now a terrifying thought. One shark was bad enough, but now people had to imagine hundreds of them. Shark sightings skyrocketed, and armed motorboats were sent out to patrol the sea. Even the mayor of Matawan put a bounty of $100 on any shark's head. The results were bleak. One shark caused enough hysteria for the entire East Coast to hate every single shark that swam in their waters. Even other local governments were putting bounties out, and nearly 100 sharks were captured and killed during what's now known as the East Coast Shark Hunt, leading to it becoming the largest animal hunt in history. The public were scared and angry, and unfortunately this one single shark gave way to the legendary reputation of a cold-blooded oceanic killing machine. By now, I'm sure you all have your own image of what kind of shark we are talking about. I've kept the classification vague, and I'm 99% sure most of you are picturing the film Jaws and its horrifying portrayal of the great white shark. You're not alone either. Upon hearing this story for the first time, I too envisioned the Hollywood star Bruce the Shark, but the actual truth is very muddy. Let's get to the depth of all this and find out who and what our killer really was. During the first attack, witnesses claimed to have seen a shark 9 feet in length. Following the second attack, scientists and the general public were throwing theories around in order to figure out what kind of shark they may be dealing with and where it may have come from. One captain who happened to see the attack in Beach Haven proposed that the shark had come from the Caribbean after the Spanish-American War and stuck around this long. Another theory about the shark's origin was the ongoing World War I. People blamed the deaths at sea from German U-boats, claiming that the shark got its taste and want for human flesh after devouring dead sailors. The days following the final attack, the East Coast now had an enhanced awareness of sharks in the area. Everyone was claiming to have caught the shark and claiming their bounty money. After all the attacks had happened, sharks were being captured and examined to determine whether or not they had caught the killer. One man intrigued by the unfolding events was Michael Schleiser, the lead animal trainer for Barnum and Bailey Circus and a popular taxidermist for the Smithsonian Institution. Sensing a unique opportunity, Schleiser and his friend John Murphy planned a trip from South Amboy, New Jersey to Raritan Bay. On July 14th, only 2 days after the last attack, these two, near Sandy Hook Bay, having gone further than Raritan Bay in their search for the shark. They at some point dropped a net to catch some fish for breakfast before continuing their journey. This spot was 4 miles away from the mouth of Matawan Creek. While discussing the matter of the shark they might find, something ran into the net. Schleiser then saw a large black fin. They were nearly being pulled into the water, and it was quite the battle. They survived and ended up killing the shark with a broken oar. The shark was cut open at the belly, and they found around 15 pounds of suspicious fleshy material and bones inside. The shark was taken to scientists and identified as an adolescent great white shark. The shark was taxidermied and put on display in a shop on Broadway. After the shark was caught, not a single shark attack occurred in the area, which should put this story to rest. Well, as we mentioned before, there were a few skeptics who didn't believe in the shark attack story at all. A man from Long Island wrote into the New York Times stating,
"Having read with much interest the account of the fatality off Spring Lake, New Jersey, should like to offer a suggestion somewhat at variance with the shark theory. Scientists believe it is most unlikely that a shark was responsible, and lots of people believe it much more likely that the attack was made by a sea turtle. Scientists have spent much time at sea and along shore and have several times seen turtles large enough to inflict just such wounds. These creatures are of a vicious disposition, and when annoyed are extremely dangerous to approach, and it is a common theory that Bruder may have disturbed one while it was asleep on or close to the surface."
His theory sounds ridiculous to us now, but back in 1916 we knew very little about marine life. People were just trying to make heads or tails of the situation when, in the past, they were told explicitly that sharks are not hostile to humans. However, with this ridiculous theory out of the way, there was actually reasonable skepticism regarding Schleiser's entire story. During the day, the taxidermy was unveiled. Schleicher, ever the attention grabber, regaled the audience with details on the day he killed the shark, details that changed with every telling. Certain people were convinced with his story too, such as Dr. John Nichols, who was impressed when shown the shark. The shark was about 7.5 feet, 350 pounds, and according to his observation, definitely a great white. Nichols seemed convinced that this was the sea wolf, the man-eater. But not everyone was convinced. A lion tamer from a circus killing the most wanted animal in America who couldn't keep a story straight. Sadly, the shark disappeared in the years after 1916, likely falling apart due to a rushed taxidermy job. There exists just one photo of it, confirming its existence, but little more. The War of the Shark continued after the unveiling of the Raritan shark, but it began dying down not long after. It's unclear if Michael Schleicher ever got reward money from the various townships in New Jersey, but it seemed many people accepted the claim regardless. As time passed by, interest in this case naturally began fading too. By August, life was returning to normal. Sharks were still spotted from time to time, but nobody was attacked. Sharks themselves would have many more infamous days, from the USS Indianapolis sinking in 1945 to the sensationalized summer of the shark in 2001, but none were as thoroughly influential as the 1916 attacks. Joseph Dunn, the lone survivor, lived until 1981. Although he had many nightmares and he walked with a limp for quite a while, the attack didn't permanently change his life. Unlike a man named Peter Benchley, the man was at various points a Marine, a reporter, and a speechwriter for President Lyndon Johnson, but at some point around the time he moved to Princeton, New Jersey, he may have heard about the legend of the summer of 1916. This story would eventually inspire the novel and film he'd be forever known for, Jaws. The greatest legacy of that fateful summer wasn't in the lives it took or in the institutions it impacted. It was in helping to create one of the greatest films of all time. With this old, waterlogged sea story complete, now it's time to ask a few questions. Chief among them, what caused a shark to intentionally attack 5 people? Was it really one shark or multiple? What species of shark was it? And finally, was the shark Michael Schleicher killed the fabled sea wolf? The most straightforward question is, was there one or multiple sharks? If you were to look at a map from Beach Haven to Matawan, it's a reasonably straight line. The distance is another matter, 45 miles from Beach Haven to Spring Lake and 30 miles from Spring Lake to Matawan. How fast can a shark go? Well, a mako shark was once tracked across 1,500 miles in 3 months' time, roughly 17.6 miles a day. The average cruising speed of a great white is 2 miles per hour, and they never stop moving. The attacks were spaced out 5 and 6 days. So yeah, any shark can make the distance. We can't tell exactly the type of shark from the bite wounds of the victims, but all 5 came from the jaws of a shark with long, smooth-edged, stiletto-type teeth. All the attacks were roughly the same time of day, midday. The style of the attack was sneaking up and attacking the victim from underneath. Different shark species attack in different ways. The wounds were all about 14 inches wide. The location of the last 3 attacks complicates things, and we will get to that, but for the most part, we can safely conclude it was probably one specific shark. Why this shark attacked is a question that cannot be fully answered, but we can try. Now, what attracted the sharks is pretty easy to figure. The temperature. This year featured record-breaking heat, which both drew in sharks near and far, and more people than expected. The number of sharks recorded that year was far higher than expected. They'd probably traveled to the Jersey Shore for food or to mate. The massive number of sandbar sharks and other moderately big sharks itself drew in even larger predators. In addition, sewage was now being dumped into the area for the first time, attracting more sharks. But why did this one attack people and keep attacking? A common theory is the rogue shark theory. Similar to how some elephants can sometimes become enraged and angry at just about everything, it's not widely accepted in the scientific community because sharks are not quite wired that way. They can develop differently, however, under certain circumstances, especially when injured or hungry. Juvenile sharks in particular can be very aggressive for absolutely no good reason. One theory that's accepted among shark experts is the accessory population theory. In a large group of sharks, there will always be stragglers, sharks that are cut off from the group and are distant from anything resembling group life. Behavior becomes unpredictable. This is made worse if there is a congenital disability or an injury. Most accessory population sharks tend to be young, which leads to more aggression. We can't ever understand the psychology of a shark the same way understanding a murderer's mindset is never fully clear, but this is the most reasonable assumption. Now the big question, what shark did this? First off, while there are species of sharks that are known for attacking people, really any decently large shark can be a threat to a human. It's just most don't bother. Sandbar sharks, the most common New Jersey shark, fall under this category. A hammerhead can be violent, but just about any witness can tell them apart from most sharks. The three most common sharks that attack humans are tiger sharks, bull sharks, and the great white. The tiger shark is famous for eating just about anything, including garbage, and they can appear in the North Atlantic, but they much prefer the Pacific or the southern parts of the Atlantic. Not a single one was reported north of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina in 1916, so we can safely rule it out. The bull shark is an interesting specimen, infamously aggressive. It's been implicated in dozens if not hundreds of attacks against people. It's not particularly common in New Jersey, but they do appear from time to time. What makes them stand out is the fact that they can live in freshwater and saltwater. Most sharks can't stay in fresh water for more than a couple of hours. Bull sharks have been found deep in the Mississippi and the Amazon, and Matawan Creek isn't the ocean. Finally, you have the enormous great white, the most famous and dangerous shark in the entire world. It's not a common animal. To this day, the great white is still somewhat considered an endangered species, but when they appear, nothing compares. They also have a long history of attacks on people, although they tend to mistake a person for a seal. At first glance, it looks likely that the Jersey Maneater was a bull shark. Male bull sharks tend to grow about 7 to 8 feet. Most descriptions of the shark were 8 to 9 feet, and one can reasonably assume witnesses were overshooting the size. The freshwater details should make it a deal breaker. No great white can live for a day or more in Matawan Creek, right? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Matawan isn't a freshwater creek. It's something known as a tidal river or salt creek. Other types of sharks like sandbar sharks have been reported in the area. Well, we definitely know at least one great white was active in the area. That doesn't mean it was the shark. Could it even fit in Matawan? Yes, actually, it was big enough to fit steamers early in its history. It's pretty wide. A male great white can grow up to be 13 feet. Thus, it cannot be the shark seen by witnesses, unless it was a juvenile, perfectly fitting the accessory population theory. The teeth are an issue though. Great white teeth are not stiletto type. They are triangular and don't tear, they crush. Except for when they are young. Then the teeth are still developing and thus are more like a mako shark's teeth, the sharp stiletto type. The bite wounds were 14 inches apart. A juvenile's jaw won't be 14 inches wide, but if the shark shakes their head while biting, it will result in similar spaced out wounds. The wounds on Charles Bruder are unique in that entire limbs are missing, which is common with great white attacks. But those attacks are usually very clean cut. His wounds were jagged, likely due to shaking and not a singular bite. More proof it was a juvenile. Finally, the fact all victims were attacked from underneath matters a lot. Only one shark species does that, just the great white. Bull sharks tend to go head on or from the sides or back. While this is by far the most controversial question in the 1916 shark saga, I feel the evidence shows that the perpetrator of the attacks was a juvenile great white. If this were a court case, it would be a fairly open and closed conviction. So the final question, was the Raritan shark the Jersey Maneater, or was it smoke and mirrors from a trickster? Michael Schleicher might have been theatrical, but he definitely killed a juvenile great white near the mouth of Matawan Creek, and the human bones and flesh were confirmed to be real by Dr. John Nichols. The shin bone points towards Lester Stillwell. The rib was possibly from Charles Bruder's chest wound. There is some debate on if the shin bone was misidentified as another type of bone, but it doesn't really matter. Some people like to argue that it was perhaps an unrelated corpse that was eaten, but what are the odds someone just drowned, was never reported, and eventually got eaten by a great white during a massive manhunt? It's assuming a lot, and there was never another shark reported to have human remains inside during the entire month. And hundreds of sharks were killed. The amount of human flesh is also noteworthy. Stanley Fisher lost roughly 10 pounds of flesh, and Joseph Dunn plausibly could have lost 5 pounds from his bite wound. The killed shark was 7.5 feet long and 350 pounds, well within the margin for a juvenile great white. Finally, the most obvious point, the attack stopped after July 14th. If the Jersey Maneater had still been on the loose, odds are it would have attacked again, perhaps further north in New York, but no attacks ever happened. We feel that when put together, the Raritan shark was indeed the fabled serial killer shark of New Jersey. And that about leads us to the end of the tale of the Matawan Maneater. In the span of 12 days, one shark terrorized an entire state and drove a nation to the brink. Its motivation is impossible to know, but the aftermath of its actions were clear. 4 good men, Charles Van Zant, Charles Bruder, Lester Stillwell, and Stanley Fisher, died. One lucky kid, Joseph Dunn, survived by the skin of his teeth. The event drove the nation nearly mad with fear and vengeance. Was it worth it? Of course not. How many sharks were killed during the manhunt? Hundreds. How many deserved it? Only one. To judge all sharks because of the actions of the Jersey Maneater is like judging all women because Myra Hindley existed, or Hungarians because of Elizabeth Bathory. Sure, sharks can kill. An average of 6 people a year die from sharks. In return, hundreds of thousands of sharks are killed. To judge an entire species because of its worst member is cruelty. The great white of 1916 was an aberration with no comparison. Perhaps only the legendary Jaws of the silver screen lives up to it in its reputation. It truly was the serial killer of the seas, but this brings up an interesting question to the forefront. 1916 is a pretty early year for a serial killer. Was the so-called serial killer shark the first recorded serial killer of the 20th century? The first recorded serial killer in recorded US history? The world's first recorded serial killer? Not even close. Maybe someday soon, we'll give the answers to all of those questions.